Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the program. My name is William Hemsworth. It's great to be with you all. I'm pleased to welcome our guest back into the program, Mike Aquilina. He's the Executive Vice President of the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology and a contributing editor for Angelus News. He's author of more than 50 books, including The Fathers of the Church and the Villains of the Early Church. He hosts the Way of the Fathers podcast for CatholicCulture.org and edits the Reclaiming Catholic History series for Ave Maria Press. Mike, welcome back to the show, and how are you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me back. I'm doing all right for a man with COVID.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. I saw that on Facebook, and I'm sure, like many others, we're all praying for you. So I hope you get through it quickly.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. So congrats on another book. And the book we're talking about today is Friendship and the Fathers, How the Early Church Evangelized. And it's a really fascinating read. Now, what made you decide to write this book, and why is it so needed today?
Well, what made me decide to write it was just a brief encounter with a dear friend of mine, Pat Fagan. Pat teaches at Catholic University of America. He's kind of a renowned psychologist. He's done a lot of important work in his field. I was giving a paper at Notre Dame University, and after I gave the paper, I was making my way back to my chair, and Pat just grabbed me and he said, "You know, Mike, you should write a book on friendship and the fathers." And I just said to him, I said, "I don't think there's enough material." And he shrugged, and I sat down, and I started to make a list of all the material that might go into such a book. And just sitting there thinking off the top of my head, I came up with a pretty substantial list. And of course, this preoccupies me then. And I go back to my hotel room and I do a little bit of Googling and looking at other sources. And I find that there's even more material. And then I get back home and into my library. And sure enough, I found still more once I was able to dig into real books. So, within 2 weeks of Pat saying that to me, I had put together a proposal and sent it off to a publisher, and I had a book contract.
All right.
So that's why I wrote the book. Those are the circumstances. But why Pat suggested it is another matter, and I think he suggested it because as a psychologist with some expertise in sociology, Pat was looking at what was going on out there, and he saw the decline of friendship in our culture today. He sees the rise of social isolation, and all of this in spite of the fact that we have these wonderful new social media, and we're even using one right now. These are wonderful developments in many ways, but they have tended, strangely enough, to isolate us even more. So Pat sees all that as a psychologist, and he sees that perhaps the solution is to be found in the writings of the fathers, and I found out that I agree with him.
All right. Now, how to piggyback on that, in your introduction, you discussed the growth rates in the faith during the early church, even during times of persecution. And you say it's a story of friendship. What do you mean by that?
Well, that persecution was intermittent, yes, but it was there. It was on the books. For the first 275 years of Christianity, it's a long time. And yet, during that time, when Christianity was illegal, when it was a capital crime, the church grew at a steady rate of 40% per decade worldwide.
Wow.
40% per decade worldwide. You think about that. That's astonishing growth rate. We haven't been anywhere near that since then. And how did it happen? Because we didn't have access to any of the media that existed then. There were no electronic media. There were no real print media, right? Everything had to be copied out by hand. That's how you got published, was your books were copied out by hand. And that was very expensive. It was very time consuming, very laborious, and it required skilled labor. So who could afford that? Christianity didn't have access to any of the public fora. We couldn't stand in the middle of the marketplace and preach, because to do that was to expose ourselves to certain death. So how did the church grow? It wasn't our liturgy. It wasn't our preaching. Those are private things. You weren't allowed to attend unless you were a baptized Christian. No, the church grew by means of personal friendship. Christians befriended the people next door, the people down the street, the people who worked beside them in the marketplace, and they made them want to be Christians. There were no special programs involved. Today when we think of evangelization, they think, oh man, I got to get certified by the chancery or by my pastor. I have to go through a video course that's sponsored by some major apostolate, and at the end of it get my certificate.
Right.
And that's not the case. That's not the case today. Although I love a lot of those programs, they're not essential. Baptism is essential, and we are called with our baptism, and we're called to evangelize. We're called to be apostles in the world. The early Christians sensed that vocation, and they lived that vocation very faithfully. And the evidence, the proof, is in the growth of the church during those centuries.
And so we can take that lesson today and apply it. Start with person in front of you, right next door. You don't have to go through all these, I don't want to say obstacles and hurdles, but you can do it right where you're at. These other programs are good. I'm not denouncing them or anything, but
yeah.
Now, one of my heroes is Saint Irenaeus. And of course, you have a chapter about him in your book. And he's known for many things against heresies and his refutation of the Gnostics. How does the subject of God and friendship come up in his refutation of the Gnostics?
Well, the Gnostics really didn't buy into the idea of incarnation, right? They didn't like the idea of the world or flesh at all, and the doctrine of the incarnation arrived as a scandal to them. It was crazy to say that God, who is transcendent and infinite, subjected himself to human flesh, that he became incarnate, that he took flesh and he dwelt among us in the world to save the world because he loved the world. All of these ideas were scandalous to the Gnostics, and Irenaeus kind of reveled in them. He was the great saint of the incarnation, and he was the great saint who spoke up against Gnosticism and refuting the many varieties of that heresy. The incarnation was Christ's expression of friendship. It's the extent to which he would go for the sake of befriending us, and there was kind of a fundamental truth of pagan philosophy. Aristotle said it, Cicero said it, that friendship required both parties, both friends, to be equal in every way. Okay, you had to be equal, and you had to share the same opinions and important things. And Aristotle even used in order to illustrate that principle. Aristotle said, for example, that you couldn't have a god befriending men. That's just an impossibility because of the disequality there, the inequality between the parties. And yet, in the incarnation, you find God seeking equality in this way with friends, with those he had come to save. And our Lord gets to his Last Supper, and he looks at this motley crew he had gathered around him, his apostles, and he says to them, I don't call you slaves, I don't call you servants, I call you friends. I have called you friends. And that is a seismic event when he speaks those words. It's a beautiful moment in history. Ignatius got the import of that moment. He got the import of the incarnation, and he expressed that in the 2nd century.
Very good. Now, sometimes with friendships, there's falling outs. There's times where maybe we don't speak. And I got to your chapter on Basil of Caesarea and Gregory Nazianzen. Now, they have a very interesting story within their friendship, but what can we learn about friendship from these two great fathers?
Well, lots of things, equality isn't everything. Now, they were equals in many ways. They were equals in social status, for example. They came from essentially the same social class. They were equals in education. They were equals in their personal gifts. Boy, you're talking about two of the great fathers of the church, two of the greatest figures in Christian history, and they forged a friendship when they were very young. They ended up being roommates, housemates together when they were in college, when they were studying together in Athens. And yet they were very different personalities. They didn't have equivalent personalities. They didn't even have complementary personalities. they had personalities that really didn't seem to go well together in a lot of ways. Basil was a no-nonsense man of action, right? He was a great thinker. He was very smart, but he did not hesitate to act. He took decisive action, and he did what he thought was the right thing to do. He could be forceful, and he didn't have a lot of time for discussion. He wasn't the Hamlet type. He wasn't going to say on the one hand, on the other hand, on the one hand, on the other hand. No, he was going to figure out what was the right thing to do, and he was going to do it. Now, Gregory, on the other hand, was introspective. He liked to mull things over. He liked to think about things. He loved especially to write about things, to work them out on paper. And he was a great writer. He liked solitude. He liked to be alone. And his fondest wish was to spend his life alone writing. And yet Basil somehow persuaded him first to become ordained a priest and then to be ordained a bishop. Now, Basil saw the value of having a man of Gregory's brilliance and Gregory's gifts in both of those offices. And so I'm sure that he used the full force of his persuasive powers when he approached his friend. Now, Gregory, for his part, could be something of a pushover, right? He would give in. He didn't like to fight. He would give in, and then he would regret giving in, and he would be kind of moody and passive aggressive for a long time afterward. And so this defined their relationship, and the lingering effects of Gregory's resentment lasted for years, and really they lasted to some degree till the end of Basil's life. Now, at the end of Basil's life, Gregory was the man they called to come out and eulogize him. And his eulogy for Basil is one of the great biographies we have from antiquity. And it really does show us, more than any other document or combination of documents, the greatness of his friend Basil. But it also is an honest record of the ups and downs of their friendships, even the estrangements in their friendship, and how they got through those times. There's no sugarcoating of friendship in the works of the fathers, and that's one thing that I tried to make clear in my book. That friendship isn't just what you find in a Hallmark card. That friendship has its ups and downs, it has its difficulties, and the fathers show us ways to work through those difficulties.
Absolutely. And one thing I like about your book is the large blocks of text that you give directly from the church fathers. And then, of course, you're writing about them as well. So it's not just your opinion. You're actually laying it out for the reader. Like, here's what they said. Here's why. So I think that's very helpful as well, because you get your perspective and then you get it directly from the fathers too.
Yeah, my great goal in life is not to get people to read Mike Aquilina, it's to get them to read the fathers. And if I can make that easier for people, because people complain about reading ancient texts, and I get that.
Yeah,
I get that. It's a different world, and you need a little bit of a ramp up into it. All I see myself as providing is a little ramp up into the fathers.
Yeah, and one of the gifts I always give to the people I sponsor in RCIA is I'm going to butcher the title because I don't have it in front of me, but like the Introduction to the Fathers. Mm-hmm. So it's always a book I give, so hopefully to introduce them to reading a little more. You also discuss one of the among many other great saints in there, Saint John Chrysostom, and he has an interesting work called On the Priesthood, and you talk about how he says that deception among friends can be virtuous. And I know some people are like, "What are you talking about?" Now, obviously, it's disturbing to some, but what does that mean exactly? What is he trying to get at?
Well, see, I think what he was trying to get at in the text is an ironic point. I don't think he's trying to propose what he did as a virtuous course of action. Chrysostom is a master rhetorician. and he's a master at telling a story. He's a very careful and deliberate writer. I don't think he was writing this to propose it as a course of action. He did deceive one of his friends when he said, "Oh yeah, you go forward to ordination, I'll go right with you," right? In order to encourage the guy to move on. And the guy put himself forward, got himself ordained, and Chrysostom, meanwhile, had booked. You know, he was no part of it by that point. And that the man was understandably upset. His friend was upset. And so Chrysostom gets a laugh out of it in the book, but I don't think he was proposing dishonesty as a course here. I think he was being ironic. I'm open to being persuaded otherwise, but I'm all for honesty in friendship, and by that I mean real honesty.
Same here, but I saw that. I thought I'd ask you about it because I thought it was kind of funny.
Yes.
So here in the 21st century, what can we take away, and how can we apply the works of the fathers in not only friendship but evangelization in today's world?
Well, I think the first thing we have to learn from them is the importance of friendship in evangelization. When we do this, we're following the model of Jesus. And we're doing what the apostles did, because all they did was follow the model of Jesus, who said, "I have called you friends." Now, if God himself has taken flesh in order to do that for us, there should be no one beyond the reach of our friendship. Yeah. No one at all. One of the great saints of the 20th century, Saint Jose Maria Escrivá, said, out of 100 people, we are interested in 100. Out of 100 people, we're interested in 100. And we should be, because people are interesting once you get to know them. The thing about the early Christians is they took the time to get to know their neighbors. They had this openness to friendship, and they befriended people who were very hostile to them. What we find in some of the early records is a conversion of persecutors, that the executioners or the guards of who were placed there to restrain the martyrs and to kill them were eventually converted themselves. They were converted by the witness of the martyrs. In one of my favorite texts in this book, it's the Octavius by Minucius Felix. What we see is two Christian friends going with a pagan friend, three colleagues. They're all three of them lawyers. They go to a resort for a holiday weekend. They spend the weekend in this conversation. That's just the kind of conversation friends have. And by the end of the weekend, the three of them are Christian. The two had converted their hostile friend to Christianity in the course of an ordinary vacation. It didn't require a special program. It didn't require them to sit him down in front of a laptop and make him watch videos on YouTube. No, they just had a conversation with him, and they answered his basic questions. They debated him. They even let him come at them pretty harshly, and they were able to roll with it. They were professionals. They were lawyers. They were doing what lawyers do. We should all do what we do in our profession with our coworkers and gradually bring them into the fold through our friendship, just like the early fathers did.
Amen to that. Now, one of the other books you wrote is The Witness of Early Christian Women. Mm-hmm. I don't know, it came out a few years ago, but my daughters they love Saint Perpetua. And so so do I. So I got this book for him, and my 10-year-old daughter has a question, and I told her I'd ask you. I answered the question, but I told her I'd ask you too. And she's very excited. She wants to know what a church father is. She's 10.
Okay. Well, I would say that the fathers are a select group of the most important teachers in the early church. Okay. They're this select group. They're all writers. Okay, because they're the people we know. They're the people whose witness has survived in words. Okay, so it's a group that's traditionally numbered about between 100 and 150, sometimes a little bit more, but usually in that range. How do we decide who's a father? Well, there's no list. Okay, there's no list out there. There's no canonical list. There's no process of canonization. It's kind of traditional. All right. these are the names that have come down to us. They're the people we look to as authorities. And generally, there are four qualities that the church has looked for. One is holiness of life. The other is a soundness of doctrine, orthodoxy, we usually say, right?
Right.
The third is antiquity, and they have to be from the early church. So from the first 750 years thereabouts. And then the final quality is church approval. Have they been cited as authorities within church documents, in the encyclicals of the popes or in the catechism of the Catholic Church? And so it's fairly easy to document those things. The church usually makes exceptions for a couple of eccentric characters along the way. But in general, it's true that the people we call fathers fulfill those categories. What she may be getting at, because of the book you held up, is are there mothers of the church? And I would say yes. I would say yes without qualification. The word patres, from which we get patristics, the study of the fathers, really is designed to include both parents, right? It's inclusive. It's an inclusive term. It's traditional to refer to certain of the ancient Christian women, Saint Scholastica, for example, and oh boy, why am I blanking on?
Oh, it's all right.
But say I'll blame COVID, okay? That now this will drive me crazy. But it's traditional to refer to certain of the ancient Christian women as mothers, as Mother Scholastica, for example, and even in the liturgy they're referred to as such. So I really don't have any qualms about using that term to describe the ancient Christian women whose witness we have still today. They're a small number because we don't have as many writings from early Christian women as we'd like to have. But again, I don't have any qualms with the title.
Yeah, she was just curious, so I thought I'd ask the expert since I was talking to the author of the book that she was reading. Now, the book was released on May 19th by Emmaus Road. What feedback have you received, and where can our listeners purchase it?
Well, I was able to give an address on the subject at one of Franciscan University's conferences this summer, and it may have been the biggest crowd I've ever addressed at Franciscan University.
Oh, wow.
I think that shows the interest in the topic, that people want to hear this. This is something that resonates with them. It makes sense to them, and they want to learn from the fathers about how to carry it forward. By the end of my talk, the Q&A session just would not come to an end. The speaker who was supposed to be in the next session showed up at the door. The escorts came to bring me out of the room, and I actually continued the Q&A session outside in the hall because people just wanted to keep the conversation going. I think it's a fascinating conversation. I think there's so much to learn from the fathers, and I think we need to hear this. If we're becoming more lonely, as all the studies seem to show us, we need to fix this. This is an indictment of Christians. If people are lonely today, then we're not doing our job. Jesus said, I have called you friends. We're failing because we're not following after his model and making other people feel that they're beloved with this special love of friendship. We need to learn it from our ancestors because they did it well. They did it so well that the church grew at that rate of 40% per decade.
All right. Well, one last question. You've been involved with the St. Paul Center since its founding.
Yes.
And you have an anniversary event coming up. Did you want to share with the listeners about it?
Yeah, we'll be marking our 20th anniversary, which is pretty significant because it started, with just me and Scott and Kimberly, Scott's wife, having conversations about, what would be the best thing to do at that point. And I still remember those conversations vividly, as if they were yesterday. And now it's 20 years. It's just so hard to believe that time has gone by and that the center has the footprint that it has today and is making the difference that that we dreamed about way back then. I don't know that we thought we would live to see that kind of growth, but we did dream about it.
And here it is, doing great things. So everyone go to the website, stpaulcenter.com. There's lots of free resources there. Mike, I thank you so much for your time today. Check out the book, Friendship and the Fathers, How the Early Church Evangelized. You can get it wherever books are sold. Thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me.
All right. God bless you.